Hi there, Ronnie here, coming at you with a video. It's Pride Month, um, which I note in myself because I am very blessed with a great many friends, some of whom are LGBT. And as such, I sort of keep an eye on what's going on. And what seems to be going on, if America is to be believed, is the most almighty sort of pushback to the point where it seems to be that the conservative sort of right-wing arm of Christianity over there seem intent to push for America becoming a Christian theocracy as a style of government. Now, leaving aside all the red flags that would put up, how would that affect the LGBT community? It would be horrendous. Now, to be clear, there are a great many Christians out there who either don't think their God has a problem with LGBT, or think, well, maybe they do, but quite frankly, there's bigger fish. There's bigger problems out there. A man sleeping with a man, a woman sleeping with a woman, who you identify gender-wise. They kind of put, down the list compared to things like famine, murder, mass shootings, warfare happening around the world. I mean, there's actual problems in the world. But when it comes to the right wing, who seem to be pushing this theocracy, they've made it pretty clear that they would love to roll back the rights for anyone who's gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans, let alone pansexual, asexual, and all the rest. And I think this is horrific. Horrific. Not terrific, horrific. But what worries me most is the motivation. Other than the obvious, they're just doing it because they don't like them people. The motivation for it essentially seems to be God doesn't like gay people. It says so in the Bible, therefore we must bow down to God and everything, and we must be respectful of him, and as such we need to say, right, God does not approve of this, therefore they cannot have the same rights. Leaving aside the fact that if you take the Bible as absolute, two men having sex with each other or two women having sex with each other, which according to certain interpretations of the Bible, again there is a lot of wiggle room, but certain people certainly look at one passage and say that it is an abomination unto the Lord, as is eating shellfish and wearing a garment made of two different threads. So if the Bible is to be believed, two men sleeping together or two women sleeping together is right up there with eating oysters and wearing a polycotton blend shirt. And when you put it like that, you have to sort of start looking at this and sort of say, well, hold on a minute. Because they're all listed as abominations unto the Lord. So they're all being described as being equally offensive to him. And if you're honestly going to make the claim that your deity honestly sees two men or two women having sex as terrible, but so is eating an oyster, so is wearing a polycotton blend shirt, then I do have to wonder about his sort of skewed view of the world. But the problem, and this is where the theocrats really have a problem here, is in order to even have the argument, they have to go up what I call the steps. Because if you are going to claim that people who are LGBT should not be allowed the same rights because God doesn't like them, and we are a theocracy, therefore we should deny them the same rights because God sees them as lesser than. In order to have any viability to that line, you have to go up the steps. You have to go up the stairway of argumentative truth. And if you falter, if any of the steps, you fall down on any of the steps, you can't go beyond them. You just dum down to the bottom of the stairs again. And I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to go through it again because it is important. So the first step is you have to prove that there's a deity. You know, that there is a creator, an intelligent designer, whatever you want to call it. You have to prove that. Then you have to prove that there's only one. And the reason I say that is it tends to be the Abrahamic, the monotheistic religions that seem to be the biggest naysayers when it comes to LGBT rights. Pantheistic religions have a far more open view. Now, I'm fairly certain that there are people in pantheistic religions, like any other religion, that have interpretations. But on the whole, they seem to be more open. So you have to prove there's one. Then you have to prove that that one actually watches over us and judges us. You have to prove then, you know, that God is watching. He's looking. Then you have to prove that God is interacting and communicating with us. I always find it funny that you listen to a lot of the sort of right-wing Christians, and they'll say, you know, the definitive word of God is the King James Bible, in their opinion. It's a nice idea in theory. I just want one of the sort of people who challenge them on this come up with what is, I accept, an incredibly facetious argument, but it's still an obvious argument. To actually turn around and say, so God said this, did he? And wait for them to admit, yes, he said that. Because then you say, so God spoke to someone who probably understood only Aramaic, and he spoke to them in Elizabethan English, or Jacobean English. Because obviously God did not say, thou shalt not kill. He may have said something, if he exists and actually communicated, he may have said something similar in Aramaic or Hebrew or whatever. But he didn't say thou shalt not kill. He didn't use those exact words, because those exact words are Elizabethan Jacobean English. And yes, it's an incredibly facetious and pedantic point, but it's worth remembering. Because it does come to a point later on in the steps. So yeah, you have to prove that he's communicated. You have to prove that in those communications he has said something about gay people or the LGBT community. Then you have to prove that what he said was something negative. Then you have to prove that what he said has been accurately recorded and passed down without change or bias. And we know about bias because we know that the Bible originally had a lot more books, but it was kind of edited down depending on the needs of the day. So we know that the Bible has been edited. Then you have to prove that God is unchanging. That his position then is his position now. Then you have to prove he's right. And even if you get to that last step, you have to prove he's right, and he is God is not a valid answer to that. Because too often, what we get is yes, he is right because he is God. No, that's not an answer. You have to prove that he's right. Now, if you can prove all of that, then and only then do you have the right to say, God has a problem with gay people. If we have a theocracy, then we would have to lessen the rights of the LGBT community. But then comes the last thing, which has nothing to do with the steps, but it has to do with your religion as a whole. You have to prove you're worth listening to. And what I mean by that is this. Even if you could prove that your God was correct, which I don't think you can do, because I don't think you can even prove any deity exists, let alone the Abrahamic one. Even if you could prove God was right, so what? So what? I am blessed. I said at the start of this, I am blessed with many friends and family who are L, G, B or T. And they have been some of the most moral, compassionate, decent, caring people I've ever known. And maybe part of that is as a reaction to the oppression that they are subjected to, and as such they don't wish to pay that oppression forward. That's entirely possible. But I cannot conceive of wanting to accept, agree, let alone worship a God that would hold such people in contempt simply because the gender of the person they love or the gender they identify as. It is obscene to me that a religion which is apparently about love spreads so much hate and discourse. And again, it's not everyone. If you want to know why people are turning from God, first of all, you'd have to, again, prove God existed before, you say we're turning our back on them. Turning our back on them presumes that we actually agree, we believe he exists. For all you know, God is a woman. I see these white nationalist Christians and all their rhetoric. I would love it if they went up to the pearly gates and they found out that God was a black lesbian. That would just win the day for me. Or God's a Native American lesbian. Particularly in America, that would be funny. But I think as long as you have these kinds of groups being so disdainful, pride events will, by necessity, need to continue. The moment anyone says, why do they need to keep fighting, is kind of self-answering. Because you think that the rights that they've won are sort of gifts given, that they should be grateful for what gifts we've given them. And people say, oh, what about straight pride? That's an utterly inane notion, and I'll tell you why. There are several countries in the world where you can be executed simply for being gay. There are several more countries out beyond that where you can be imprisoned for being gay. There are countries where the fact that you are gay means that you cannot make legal decisions for your other half, that you cannot get married, that you cannot adopt, that you can be fired, be denied housing or insurance simply because you're gay. I, as a straight man, have none of those problems. None of them. Now, I might be denied things for other reasons, but my sexuality is never going to be one of them. And as such, the very notion that we need a straight pride is just stupid. Utterly, utterly stupid. I would love to see the day when we don't need pride events. Not because I'm against them, but because I look forward to the day when the fight is over and we just accept the LGBT community as just a fact of life. But we're not there yet. As such, I believe the Pride events will continue. And why not? When the fight is over. Because equality is simply when something is. When you have the right to it at birth. For example, people talk about marriage. I had the right to marry the moment I was born. I wasn't allowed to marry when I was born, obviously. But the fact of my birth didn't stop me. I have the right to marry. That is part of my life. What happens is, if it had turned out that I were gay, I would have that right stripped from me. So it's not right that the LGBT community are demanding as extras. They are simply demanding that which has been taken from them, simply for being born a little different, is restored. And rightly so. True justice and equality comes when we simply accept our fellow man for who they are. That if I walk down the street hand in hand with my girlfriend, no one bats an eyelid. Okay, I'm just over 6 foot. If my girlfriend's 4'11" and we're walking down the street hand in hand, I have a feeling people might look and bat an eyelid because of the height difference. But the fact that we're a heterosexual couple walking down the street hand in hand will not raise an eyebrow. But eyebrows are raised if we're not a heterosexual couple. Eyebrows are also still raised, although not to the same extent, but they're still raised if we're not both the same ethnicity. We need to move to a point where the eyebrows simply don't raise. Where a couple, regardless of who they are, regardless of the genders involved, can walk down the street hand in hand without raising an eyebrow. It just simply is. And I hate it when people say, if I walk down with my girlfriend, that's just a couple. But if a gay couple do it, they're making a statement. No, they're not. They're making the same, or more accurately, they're making the same damn statement I'm making, which is, this is my other half. That's life, guys. I love the sheer light. I was talking to someone the other day and they were talking about how dark the world is at times, and it is quite dark at the moment. But I told them something and I believe it. I absolutely believe it. That even with all the darkness, there is still light. there are still people that I look to and go, wow, you're amazing. You're fantastic. You make the world a better place. I'm honoured, as I've said before, I'm honoured by the friends I have, the people I know. I think they're fantastic. And I'm honoured to know them. I look forward to the day when the fact of the gender they love or the gender they identify as simply isn't an issue anymore. And we look back at this period with the same puzzlement that we look back at the really nasty side of racism, and we look back at sexism. And whilst we're not fully there on both of those issues, we're far further forward than we were in the darkest days of those. And we look back at those and we kind of shake our heads and go, really? We were that bad? And I think in time we will look back at this period and go, really? We were that bad? But until then, to all of my friends and family who are LGBT, have a safe and happy Pride.